thank you for joining Gwinnett County Public Library for our Meet the Author series discussion with Vivian Fonger in conversation with Ed Hajim. The author's book is On the Road Less Traveled, an unlikely journey from the orphanage to the boardroom. My name is Denise Ogier, and I'm with Gwinnett County Public Library's Adult Services Department. Our moderator tonight is Vivian Fonger, and she has been a tremendous supporter of Gwinnett County Public Library. She is the moderator of the Atlanta Reads Book Club that has more than 70 members. It's an online virtual book club, and you're all welcome to join. And she's also on the board of directors of the Friends of the Gwinnett County Public Library. Again, the author is Ed Hajim, and Ed is the son of a Syrian immigrant. He is a seasoned Wall Street executive with more than 50 years of investment experience. He has held senior management positions with Capital Group, E.F. Hutton, and Lehman Brothers before becoming chairman and CEO of Furman Schultz. He is now the chairman of High Vista, a Boston-based money management company. He has received the prestigious Horatio Alger Award given to Americans who exemplify the values of initiative, leadership, and commitment to excellence, and who have succeeded despite personal adversities. So tonight, Vivian and Ed will be talking to you about those adversities. Vivian?
Hi, Ed. How are you doing?
Hi, Vivian. Denise, thank you so much.
So let's begin with the first thing. I want to know, how do you pronounce your original name? I know that at your book, you say that your Hajim is not your original name. So how do you pronounce it?
Well, the story goes, and my father was a storyteller, that when they came over in 1900, my great-grandfather was murdered in the desert, and my great-grandmother was a very powerful woman, decided to take the whole family to the New World. My father was born about a year in the port before they left on the ship. When they arrived at Ellis Island, no one spoke English, spoke a number of Middle Eastern languages, but no English. And so the customs basically made up the name. The original name was Ajami, A-D-J-M-E, but they stuck an H on it, took the E off and added an I, and ended up with Hajim. And one of the problems in life, my life is the pronunciation. There's been Hajim, which sounds much better, but it's not correct. It's Hajim. And of course, all my children are blonde and blue-eyed, so Hajim wouldn't have worked anyway.
Oh, cool. I like that because I personally have, my own, I'm Chinese. So when they pronounce my Chinese name, it's so funny because my Chinese name is Sok In. That's my original name. However, I cannot use Sok In because it is two separate words. So when I come to the United States, I need to combine my actual, and for me, last name at Asia, first name, last name with the other side, we have surname and
then opposite, exactly right.
Exactly. So I know what you say, that how I need to, transform my name to get into the American.
My name, 5 letters, H-A-J-I-M, and a lifelong study to find someone else with the same name. My daughter thinks she's met there's a fellow who's in prison in Morocco that has the same 5 letters, but otherwise we're the only Hajims in the world, which is kind
really?
of, there's those 5, there's a Hajimi in Japan, but that's a first name with an E at the end. But there's no Hajim. We found someone in the 19th century, someplace in middle America that had the same 5 letters, but those have been the only 5 letters. So it's been mispronounced since the beginning of time. And I don't want to jump ahead, but they were kind enough to name a school after me at the University of Rochester. And I say, one of the reasons I let them do it is that now we have 400 kids a year that go out into the world and they have to pronounce my name correctly.
That's awesome. Hey,
Good question,
I like being unique. I mean, the whole thing is that your name being changed and now you have a unique last name. That's fantastic. That's really fantastic. Your book is amazing, as I say. This is how much I don't.
It looks like you read it.
I read it twice.
My
I
gosh.
actually, I read it twice actually, and I find it fascinating. Your story is extremely fascinating to me.
Thank you.
I really want to know that, in general, I just want to ask is that, um, as you write the book, what kind of message you want to give to, when we finish reading the book, what kind of message you want us to receive when we finish reading
Simple
the book?
message, basically, and it's an American message, is that anything is possible. You can start with nothing, have difficulty, and anything is possible. And the second message is that education is the solution to everything or almost everything. And then there's some other minor messages in the book. One of the ones that I keep coming up with is never be a victim. If you notice in my book, I'm not, you're a victim for some period of time, but always use that energy instead of being a victim, but to find out what's next and go after it. What's next is hard enough. And if you use that energy to be a victim, you won't be able to move ahead. And there's some other messages. I must admit, I had a young lady who's a scholarship student of mine come back. She says, there's 11 messages. I'm not going to repeat all 11, but the main message is anything is possible. Basically, that's the inspiration I want to give people. You can have essentially the beginning doesn't define the end. You can come from almost any place. And and I've been very, very lucky to live the American dream in many, many reasons, many, many ways. So that's the main message. And of course, I think the other message is that even when you're successful, you can have very difficult periods and you have to keep coming back.
I mean, this is so good to hear for 2020 and 2021.
Exactly.
Look at this 2 years. We need the impossible in order to get to 20 and 2021. I will ask you, share some of your, throughout this. I know that at the very beginning you talk about we have many lessons to learn about 20 and 2021. So I'll probably ask you later about 20 and 21. So let's go to. I really like that your book is divided into 3 different parts. And the first part is the beginning. The second part is about lonely, and then the third part, which is my favorite, is not lonely again. And I think that's what I get is that how you, because your book, A Journey from Orphanage to Boardroom. Okay, it's good. You become a successful person, but I think you're successful in fulfilling as a human being to have love and not lonely again and have a large family and loving. I think that's the dream that anybody should dream of, is to be that type of successful. And that is just that's why I read your book twice.
Thank you.
Really
Thank
lovely.
you so much. I'm very intimidated about the book because having gone now into bookstores, looked around and see so many books, I always thank people for reading my book. I appreciate it very much.
I'll advise people to read this book. It's so positive, especially this 2021, 2022.
It's
really
the perfect
positive.
time for now. It shows you that I keep telling people that there's got to be some positives out of 2021. I mean, I think there's a lot of we can spend the whole evening talking about. My daughter spent 3 weeks with us with her 3 boys, and she got closer to her husband. We got closer to her. We got closer to the 3 boys. It was quite an experience. There are numerous things. I keep telling the president of the University of Rochester to get on the fact that let's look at the positives of this experience. And by the way, it's the first time in this generation from the last 40 years where they've had a real crisis. Our parents went through, and I went through the sort of beginning, the Depression, the Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam. We've had very little activity in the last 30 or 40 years. There's a whole body of young people that are really not, gone through a massive international problem. So having them to solve that, I think is going to make them stronger.
I know, just like what you have done. So the first thing I want to ask you, especially 2020, 2021, is adversity. Well, you have so much adversity at your young life. How do you stay positive at your, being a positive person and not go into, I would say, the dark side? Because, a lot of people that I've seen before with your background would easily fall into the dark side, I would say. So how do you stay in such a positive route? I mean, what helped you to stay so positive?
Well, the first, my father did abandon me 3 times before I was 18 years old. I mean, in total abandonment. But on the other hand, he's constantly sent the message of unconditional love. In fact, you'll read the book, you'll see at one point in time, I wrote him a letter saying, I'm not always a good boy, but he would not hear of it. I was always the best, I was the greatest, and so forth. So that helped. The second thing that helped, that in the 50s era, there was a mentality, you go to the movies, and the heroes there, the people, when they did really well, they did well. Also being brought up in a Catholic church, Catholic schools. Catholic schools had a very simple message. If you were a good person, you did the right thing, you would do well. If you're a bad person and you didn't do well, you would go, you wouldn't end up so well. So the nuns communicated something that was very simple, but I also had a drive. I always had a picture of what I wanted to be someday as a child. For some reason, I picked that out and I said, I really want a white picket fence. I want a family, and I want to be reasonably successful. And so there was a certain drive there. But what happened basically is that during my childhood, my disadvantages, all these things that happened to me, started to become advantages. In other words, if you go from one schoolyard to the next, you learn what it is to integrate into a system. Then you go to the next schoolyard, you're even better. And of course, I went to 5 schoolyards, it's 5 homes and so forth. So one of the disadvantages turned into an advantage called adaptability. I became very adaptable. How I got through the whole thing basically was, I think children are much more resilient, than people think. But they do go to the dark side, you're right. And you need either a mentor, or you need one parent, or you need a vision. And I'm now backing a group in Boston right now that actually mentors kids from foster homes. They require the child, they require the person, the student, to talk to a counselor at least once a week, just like one would talk to his parents. So the reason I got through basically, I think, is there's a combination of the schools. The Catholic schools were excellent. My father's messages constantly giving me positive reinforcement. And I would say the system in the 40s and the 50s, there were heroes. I mean, John Wayne, Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, they always did good things, and they always ended up really well. So if you went to the movies every Saturday, like I did for a quarter, you picked up that sort of thing, that this is what you could be. Even though I was 4'6" and weighed 66 pounds, I still could sort of relate to those characters, I guess.
So at page 20 of the book, you say that whenever I wrote to him, which is your father, about getting into some sort of problem, he wouldn't hear it. He would never let me say that I did anything wrong. From his point of view, it was always someone else's fault. And he helped you to build your self-esteem and allow you to go through some pretty rough time. So do you think that even your father is not always with you? And we know that he's been absent for a long duration of time. His support and his love in a distance help you to stay positive, even though you don't really have him as a father figure. He still show you the positive path for self-esteem.
It was a communication of unconditional love, and I think that's still one of the main reasons that people are successful. They have somebody who is, and that's why I think that finding what I call P1 or partner one, finding a partner for life and someone who you can give unconditional love to, and who can love you unconditionally, is one of the successful things that you try and do in your life. My father gave that to me. He really loved me. In fact, when he kidnapped me, and I made that point in the book, that he was feeling and not thinking. He didn't know what it was to have a 3-year-old. My mother, on the other hand, who was then not accepted by her parents, and thought she had made a mistake by taking me to St. Louis. Basically, she was thinking and not feeling. She felt that basically my father might do a better job than she did. And by the way, it turns out when I finally discovered her, she was much more of a thinking person. My father was much more of a feeling person. And that's a whole other discussion you and I can get into, about the fact that all of my life I felt I was only my father. And then when I got to be 60 years old, I realized I was half my father and half my mother.
Well, that was an amazing story, but we will get to that part later. We'll definitely get to that part later. So I know that we are the library. We are with the library, and throughout your book, you talk a lot about reading. You go to vacation, you choose a book to read, and in here, are you a big reader? Do you think reading helped you to stay positive?
The only person who got more books than me is Denise, when she should. We have libraries. I mean, I'm constantly reading, and now I've got a new experience in the last 5 years is Audible. I walk every day, and so therefore I can listen to books as well. And if you listen to my book, Bob Shapiro did an excellent job of my voice. But I believe reading is almost the most important thing you can do. And I don't think there's been a time in my life that I haven't been reading at least one book at a time. In fact, the kids used to kid me. Again, there's another reason why I got through. Early in my life, even in my teenage years, I started to read what I call self-help books. I got attached.
Really?
Nobody
Wow.
introduced to me. I just sort of felt that there were some people you could read who would tell you about life. And I kind of always enjoyed that. Instead of an engineer, I probably should have taken psychology, but I didn't.
I mean, it's fascinating that you read so much, because I mean, throughout this whole book, even at the very beginning, you use Robert Frost's "The Road Not Taken." That was just amazing, and that really described a lot. That's why I really want to know, has reading helped you to stay positive as well? Because you read so
Absolutely.
much.
It's occasionally when I get down, and I do get down, I would pick up a book like Scott Peck's book, On the Road Less Traveled. That's why I named the book that. It's a combination of the fact that I traveled a lot of roads that people have not traveled, including Highway 66 when I was 3 years old. That sort of, but Scott Peck's book, On the Road Less Traveled, nails down many of the things that I believe in my life. And so when occasionally I'll reread his book, or I'll reread other books that basically help me. Howard Stevenson at the business school wrote a book called Just Enough. And that's a very important book because he always believes there's just enough financial support. If you look at my life, I had a turning point somewhere around age 47 when I decided I had just enough financial security and I wanted to seek more freedom and less financial drive. So there are books, and in my book, I named 5 or 6 books, Lou Holt and Gene Wooden, the coaches of Notre Dame and UCLA, they send a spirit that, that it's a winning spirit. It's basically anything is possible. It's not necessarily talent, it's more attitude. And I think that's the kind of thing that I find if I get down, and you do get down occasionally, things don't work out for you. You go back, you can read and write, by the way. I think writing is absolutely key. People say to me, occasionally I will sit down, anytime I change jobs or change locations, I will make a positives and negatives and I'll look at them, because writing is really the only definite form of communication. Thinking is fuzzy, talking is fuzzy, people don't remember things. When you write something and look at it. So when there was a question asked me at the University of Rochester, if you had to give a senior one, because I tend to talk too much, give them one idea, what would you do? I'd say, write down your plans. Physically, write, even though they may change, at least you know where you thought you wanted to go and how you were going to get there.
Yep, I absolutely agree. I find the more I read, it actually open up myself to so much different dimension and feelings and everything that I'm not aware of. And reading helps me, through my life a lot. And
what's really humorous is I didn't read any fiction until about 5 years ago. I didn't have time for fiction. And fiction is wonderful. I mean, my wife kept saying, she reads like this. I'm a very slow reader. That's one of my problems, being an engineer, and I'm a little dyslexic. But she reads a book every couple of days, and she reads a lot of fiction, and I would never read fiction. And she put me on to fiction, and Leon Uris and Ken Follett and Jeffrey Archer. I mean, they bring things to life. And so, I mean, someday if I live long enough, maybe I'll write a book about fiction. I've told my wife, instead of meeting her as a graduate student in San Francisco, I'm going to meet her in a smoky bar in San Francisco and save her from a life of sin or something like that, because they really do. I mean, the books are just fabulous. And so I'm getting exposed to fiction at this age of my life.
Okay, so at the end, you have to give us some recommendation about fiction. So that would be wonderful. So I know that at some point you talk about your father facing harassment as Jewish and anti sentiment harassment. Do you really think? I know that you seem to be. You don't feel like it's true, but it seems to be true because there's court cases that he has gone through. How do you feel about hearing this about your father being harassed at his workplace?
He was. I mean, in that era, anti-Semitism was reef. I mean, even when I went to college, all the fraternities would not accept Jewish kids. In fact, I was the first Jewish pledge in the history of Theta Chi fraternity, and it caused some problems in the fraternity. So, but you know, again, my father was a true victim. He fought constantly against it, and I think he would have done better if he accepted it and went on. He didn't do that. And I basically all my life I've accepted whatever it is. If there's a certain amount of anti-Semitism or prejudice or anything, I accept it and go on. I don't. When I was a manager, I didn't accept it inside the company. I would not let people be prejudiced. I think it's a very destructive influence. But in the 40s and 50s, it was very prevalent. I mean, even if you read history about President Roosevelt and things that he did, and they turned boatloads of people away and so forth. So it was a prevalent situation. It's just one of those things you have to accept. But my father, unfortunately, got into a profession where he was kind of one of a kind. I mean, in addition to being Jewish, he was a vegetarian. You know, he was one of these people that, was obsessed with being, always being clean and neat and so forth. And, aboard a ship, it's not exactly your acceptance. So if you're very different from someone, the group you're in, it's hard to be assembled. But I think that things have changed significantly. And today, I tell kids that they are so much better off. There's less prejudice. There's more opportunity. There's more scholarship. People really have. We've done you can argue that there's still problems in the United States, but relatively speaking, we've done a wonderful job of integrating everybody. And so, but I felt anti-Semitism. I mean, it's there. And one thing nice about me is that my name, it's not given away. I get into situations where people would know me for years, accept me into their system. Then at some point in time, they'd find out I was Jewish. And so it was too late to be prejudiced. I can tell you stories about that, especially in the Navy when, that happens. And I accept it as part of the system. It's not good. When I was in charge and been able to do what I did, I was violently opposed to any of that kind of thing and felt very strongly, especially in the case of women. I mean, think of you talk about anti-Semitism, you forget about it. My wife graduated college. She could be a secretary. She could be a nurse. She could be a teacher, which she was, or she could be a stewardess if she was tall enough. She wasn't. So, that changed completely too. So you can just forget some of the other prejudice we had. There was general prejudice back there in the late 40s and 50s and 60s, which has basically been cut back. It still needs work.
Yeah, I agree with you. However, lately, I don't know if you heard of something called cancel culture. That do you agree with cancel culture, or
no,
do you agree?
I think you express there are certain there's a far left and a far right that I disagree with and probably shouldn't be exposed. People get silly, but in general, most ideas should be exposed because the more you expose ideas, the more you get to a compromise. You understand people. Exactly. I mean, to understand, people's opinion, you have to listen to them and hear them. And then finally you come to the conclusion, I agree to disagree. That's all. That's fine. And then you recognize that this is the way the world is going to go. And between two people, between man and wife, there's got to be compromise because you're very different people. Now they're closer together. Some of these ideas are too far apart. You've got to pull them together. Cancel culture will hurt us.
I absolutely agree with you.
Especially in universities. You must bring, there's a place where people should be able to accept almost any ideas. And I say almost because there are certain things which you can't deny the Holocaust. You can't deny the Inquisition. You can't deny these kinds of things that really existed in history. So, but I want to accept history as it is and go forward. I do want to spend more time thinking about what's next. I think that's the most important thing in life is to let's solve our problems we have today. Let's not solve the problems that were hundreds of years ago that, nothing we can do about those problems. So the cancel culture, and the cancel culture again is a continuum. There's the real cancel culture and then there's sort of cancel culture. And I being in a university, it's not an easy decision of what you do. Nothing is easy. But the more you talk about things, the better off you're going to be, I think.
I compare the cancel culture as we banning books. We have a long history of banning books. I think everybody should be able to read any books and you make your decision. I mean, it's just like we can agree and disagree on books, but as a reader, we all know that we agree and disagree on books, but then we accept the ideas and then we process it, we understand it, and then we can agree and disagree. And
Exactly right.
that's
And
my
then that's why I
opinion.
think book clubs are wonderful. Because you get to
Mhm.
a book club, you get enough opinions about that book. Someone who
Exactly.
really believes something that probably is not true or not good can have a lot of people who they respect, basically, disagree with them. And then they come away saying, maybe I'm not 100% right. And I'll be less of a zealot. I belong to a couple of these groups, not book groups necessarily, but YPO, Young Presidents Organizations. We meet once a month and discuss things. And, sometimes you bring up something, you really are wrong. And you have friends there that say, wait a second,
Mhm.
and that's what I think you're right.
You let's say if your father is born nowadays, you think he is a little bit ahead of time of his time, or will he be much more happier if he's still alive and living his life nowadays?
You say if he was born now?
Yeah, let's say he's like about
I'm
40, 50
I'm
years old.
100%. I think people ought to pay attention to what I call context.
Mhm.
Think about someone born in 1900, the 70-year period from 1900 versus my
Mhm.
70-year period.
Mhm.
That period contained the Spanish flu, the First World War, a crazy period in the 20s, then the Depression, then the Second World War. And after the
Mhm.
Second World War, there was a somewhat difficult period as well. And then in the 70s was not a great period with huge inflation. So his
Mhm.
entire life was much more difficult than mine.
Yes.
Born in 1936, by the time I was old enough, the war was over, and therefore I was 11 or 12 years old. And then now the last 40 years have been fantastic. The changes in transportation, the changes in medicine, the changes
Mhm.
in just almost everything we do has
Mhm.
been so, well, I'm 85 years old. I mean, I
Mhm.
shouldn't even be here. So,
No,
no.
you don't even
So,
look 85.
but thank you. But it is it's a very different period. That's why I tell young people, try to understand the context that you're going to live in for the next 50 years. What
Mhm.
kinds of things will happen or possibly happen where you can get involved? And I think
Exactly.
I think it's a very good period.
I think so.
But
I think we live in.
context is important. And also context is geographic. If you're in
Mhm.
China versus the United States versus Australia, very different geographic locations. So context is something you got to understand, and that's why I don't blame my father so much. I mean, the poor guy, he comes over, he becomes very successful. He has an
Mhm.
airplane, he has buildings, he has everything.
Yeah.
29, he loses everything, and his mother dies.
Mhm.
He's very
Mhm.
close to his mother, not as close to his father, and she dies of a broken heart. It's not in the book. And then he takes this trip across to California, meets a woman in a couple of weeks, marries her, and has a child. And then 6 years later, she divorces him. Those leave marks on people that you have to
Mhm.
forgive them. Those are demons that they can't shake. I mean, the little
Mhm.
problems that I have or some other people have, I still have a certain amount of anger in my life. And just
Mhm.
think of a man who lost everything and never gained it back. I mean,
Mhm.
so that's why you have to sort of pay attention to what's happened to people. And that's why history is important, and find out what happens. I find business executives that I've known, that have fallen from grace, have lost everything and so
Mhm.
forth. They die very young,
Mhm.
they because they just have nothing to live for. And so I
Mhm.
understand the marks that left on people. My father had a huge mark on him. I mean, it was a very sad story. And he might have been a very interesting guy because he was a technology person. He was one of the early people in radio, which was the
Mhm.
technology at the time.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what I'm saying is that he seems to be very ahead of his time, but he, fall into a very difficult time. You're right. It's all about context. It is the way that it is, and you should really make use of.
Would you or I would probably got caught up in 29. Barbara,
Mhm.
my wife's parents' brother was a stockbroker, and he lost all their money in 29.
Mhm.
They had a little business, so they stayed alive and so on. My father lost everything. He was on margin and so forth, but everybody was on margin. So
Mhm.
it was a time. It was unusual. And if you were stuck someplace in Europe, I mean, I'm reading the European period in the 40s, 30s, and 40s was just awful. You know,
Mhm.
I read more and more. I read about history. I mean, stuck there for 20 years. What would that do
Mhm.
to you? Is over. Or
Yeah.
our friend Mandela down in Africa being in jail for 20 years. And there again, as a person, you got to take some respect for. He always looked for what's next. And then so that's one of my messages.
It's always look for what's next.
Yeah.
What's possible.
And use that energy to pursue it. Don't use the
Mhm.
energy to be a victim.
I know. I totally agree. So as a boy, you are a Jewish boy. You always go into a Catholic school. How do you fit into being a Catholic? But
I didn't know
you
I
know,
was Catholic. I didn't know I was Jewish. You read the book. Read the book. I asked my father for my baptismal records because I
yeah,
wanted to be a good Catholic. Oh no,
yeah.
I was a very serious religious kid. I mean, I
Mhm,
actually I was an altar boy until they found out that I wasn't baptized. So they thought I wasn't baptized. I bet
mhm,
you, being born in a Catholic hospital, I was baptized. But anyway,
mhm,
no, I didn't know I was Jewish. I didn't know I was
mhm,
Jewish till I was 11 years old when I 10 years old when I flew across country, and my father told me, and I
mhm.
was okay. Now I'm Jewish.
Does that stun you? Does that stun
I
you to
don't
you? Does that?
remember being stunned by it. It was just, I sort of accepted it. Again, by the time I was 10 or 11 years old, I was very
Mhm,
adaptable. I mean, he left me alone in a hotel room for a month when I was 11 years old. Or even that summer in the YMCA, he was gone every day, and I got up in the morning and wandered around the city and so forth. I was 10 years old. And people did that.
Adaptability.
Yeah, I learned how to be independent, and by the way, too independent. It took me a long time to trust anybody. It took me a long time to take advice from people. So each one of these things has a two-edged sword. You get very, it's great being very independent. Well, not so good, because sometimes you don't accept good advice when you're too independent.
Is that where your stubborn come from? At page 63, you said that you're a very stubborn person
Yeah.
at
Oh
that
yeah. Because you
moment.
believe yourself, and I get a little bit stubborn. But my wife has helped me an awful lot with that. I mean, she's straight ahead. She tells me, no, that you've got to get someone who can basically tell you exactly, that your shirt's hanging out in the back. She'll tell you,
Mhm,
or you didn't speak, you spoke too fast that last night. Slow down, Ed. Make your points better. And also there are certain things that a spouse does better than you do, or a partner does better than you do. No, but
mhm,
I get a little stubborn. No, but actually that's mellowed quite a bit. Once I get into business,
mhm,
I found this concept of partnership, which is so important, because you found out people that could do things better than you could do them. And
mhm,
I found I was only as good as the people I surrounded myself with. And if I had
mhm,
good partners, I succeeded, no question. If I had bad partners or the wrong partners or no partners, I failed. I failed badly. So
mhm. I have to agree because my husband is a very honest person. I mean, he would not tell me that, oh, honey, you look thin. He would tell me that, oh, you definitely look fat. You might need to lose some weight. But you need that kind of honesty, right? I
you need
mean,
an honesty.
you need that kind of honesty. I think that as a person, you always want to look for that partner that is honest to you, regardless if it's at work or is at home, because that's the only way you can improve as a person. Otherwise, you just think that you're the top of the world
Well, I
type
had
of
a
thing. And
CFO and a COO. You'll find the book. He met me when I was in my 40s. We spent 35 years together, 6'5", and Ed, you're wrong. That's the best sentence I ever had. Ed, you're wrong. And he's a great
yeah.
big guy. And okay, Steve, and occasionally I would say I'm wrong. We're going to do it anyway. Or I'd say to him, you're right. I guess I am wrong. So, but he was a
Mhm,
partner for me. He still is. We still talk. When I have problems, I call him, and it's been a gift that you have. It's like a good friend, actually, and I think that's important too. I've lost a couple of my good friends that I could
mhm,
always call up and ask the big questions to.
mhm,
And it's very important. But you're right, partner one, as I call her, is really very, very important. And
mhm,
just finding someone you can share your life with, to support your life with. Marriage has not become the biggest thing these days, but whatever just a partner of some kind that will
mhm,
basically decide, I want to share my life with you. I want to
mhm,
support you, and you can
mhm.
support them and share your life.
I think one of the things that I learned from you saying about stubborn and not good when you're going after something you want to get, I starting to see something. I starting to see that you know the culture nowadays is like there's you cannot say you dislike something when you're starting to say you dislike something. People are starting saying that you don't belong to my group and you can't do that. And I don't believe that because I really want people to tell me that I have done something wrong. If I've
Right.
done something wrong, please do tell me that I've done something wrong so I can correct. We can agree and disagree. You might not agree with what I'm doing is correct, but I think talking out and don't be stubborn to just believe that they have to believe in me. Whatever I say is correct. Is
No, this,
I
I'm writing an article about marriage for one of the publications, and they asked me,
Yeah.
what's the single most important thing? I said, to talk, and talk regularly. You know, learn to listen to someone who's close to you and constantly talk. And I recommend to people, they take a young couples take a car trip the first in every year of their marriage, so that they spend 4 or 5 days in a car, because in a car you talk
Mhm.
back and forth.
I love that you and your wife, Barbara, a very wonderful lady, that you guys always tell each other that I love you. You don't spend away from each other too long. Always tell each other I love you and stuff like that. That's what me and my husband has done, is that we always say I love you to each other. It's not because we are in vain, or you're not saying it in vain, but sometimes you just need to remind each other that love is a luxury, just like what you say at page 34, is that love is a luxury.
But I always say, she doesn't like it anymore, but I kid her about the fact, I love you more than yesterday and less than tomorrow.
All you just need to say is, I love
See,
you.
that
That's all.
does it. What else? Yeah, I gave the talk a couple of months ago. And I said, but every once in a while we skip a couple days.
But I personally think that you're right. Love is a luxury. Love, you have to, it's like a plant. You have to water it, nurture it, and everything. It doesn't matter what kind of love. It's a friendship love, or your husband and wife love, or any sort of love relationship you have. There's always nurture. You have to call people and stuff like that. One of the things you said just is that writing is so important. Nowadays, people don't talk, just text each other. How do you feel about using just
I
text?
still think writing, I mean, because you're used to what you did. We wrote long letters to each other. I mean,
Mhm.
and I think that's very healthy, because I think when you sit down, texting seems to go away. Letters, I still keep letters. I mean,
I know.
I think they're great gifts, but texting today, look, the world changes, people change. Some people, texting now does the job.
Mhm.
I just don't think it's a complete thing. I also think that the Zooming thing is, although for me it's been terrific, it's still not the best thing. I want people to be still, face to face, because it really helps a lot.
I
But
know.
no, I was talking to, in business, you want to see the person who knows how to do something. Watch how they do it, how
Mhm.
they think, how they talk, how they act, how they dress, all those kinds of, that helps you an awful lot. But, but texting is, kids do it, and God bless. I can remember when people objected to things that I did, the older generation too. And so let's accept texting as the way today's modern people are going to do something, and hopefully it works for them.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you're right about swimming, is that, nowadays I just came back from my workplace today. We just started going back to workplace, and we call it the hybrid workplace nowadays. It's 2 days a week that we can see each other. And I need that, because it's not because, I need that. So, seeing the person and you actually see what they're talking, and the facial expression change a lot than in Zoom, and you just
No,
think the
when
voice
you
or something like
turn off here, I can't say anything to you. If I think of something after I turn the machine off, I can't get a hold of you again. If I
Mhm.
talk to you in an office and I walk down the hall of my office and I think of something, I'll walk back and, say something. No, it's all there, exactly. Oh, lunch. I used to always say, I used to tour around in my company at 6 o'clock at night, talking to people, that was just the way to learn what was going on.
Okay, I have to show everybody this page 48. Your James Dean. I call
My
it the
black leather
James Dean.
jacket, yes.
Yes, your James Dean. You look like James Dean.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So it's that you call it a self-conscious to be. Ed, would there be a next book someone want to know?
Pardon?
Would there be a next book someone want to know? Would you write another book?
Yeah, I've got 2 more manuscripts. It took me 7 years, so I ended up with 3 manuscripts. The second book, which I hope to publish next year sometime, is on the 4 Ps. It's what I call a conversation with yourself. I think the only constant in life, in my mind, is your inner voice, and you should develop a language for your inner voice. And these 4 Ps that I've used for the last almost 15 years now, I wrote a book on it. It's an allegory. It's about a young man that goes to an island, meets an older man, and they spend 4 years. This is they spend this period wandering through the village of passions, the village of principles, the village of partners, and the village of plans. And then the third book it's already written. It's 32 small chapters isolating each lesson and giving examples of it, because it's going to be called lesson. I think it's going to be Lessons on the Road Less Traveled. But I really, this book is much more subtle. You got to kind of leach out the lessons there. They're not obvious, some of them, and I want to really lay them out. Like me specifically at Lehman Brothers, I spent 7 years there. I did it all right, and they still threw me out. The lesson learned there is you can do things right, you can be 100% right, and you still can fail, and that's fine. That's okay. But I want to put those lessons all down. One of the big lessons I found is that life is between self, family, work, and community, which is called giving back. Those things are always out of balance. And the third chapter is that balance is bull, because you're never in balance. You're always pushing harder on work or harder on yourself or whatever it is. And you got to keep moving those things back and forth. And I believe that giving back, the fourth part of that of life, is something very important. If you don't do that, I think you find yourself less satisfied when it's toward the end.
So Ed,
anyway,
you are,
that's a big lot of stuff. That's the third book, I hope to get it all done. What it is, what's next for me? I'm still the chairman of a company in Boston, but I don't do very much. I'm kind of an advisor. I'm the oldest. When I became the chairman, I was wearing my blue suit and my white shirt and my yellow tie, and I looked at my black shoes, and I looked out at the crowd. Nobody was wearing not even a jacket. And I said, the rumor that I'm going to change the dress code is false. So, it just, what's left of my life is basically to take my life, hopefully, and help a few people. And I can send you, I just finished a presentation at Northeastern University with a bunch of young people, and I got letters back that has paid for the entire writing of the book. I mean, people's kids said, you really helped me enormously get back on track, and you helped me, you inspired me. And if I can do that, then that's what's next for me. I hope it works.
Your book is definitely inspirational. Everybody should read it, because young kids should read it and young adults should read it. I'm trying to get
my modest goal now is, I'm gonna remove my humility. Modest goal is to get every freshman at every college in the United States to read the book. So there you go. There's a modest goal. I have 6 universities now. And then one of my friends gave the book to students at 200 universities. So I think that it will tell people that basically, anything is possible. Also to look at, I went from engineering to business school to finance. You can change the bunch of things I did that people should not be afraid of too. Because you're an engineer, you don't have to be an engineer all your life. You could be something else. And also I changed in the middle of my life from really seeking financial resources to not so seeking financial resources. Then when I was 70 years old, I stopped completely and went into community life completely by being the chairman of the board of trustees at the University of Rochester. I closed my fund, which might have been foolish, I guess, but this is something I had to do. And so
you mentioned
those
that's
are the lessons I'd like to pass on.
You mentioned that you closed your fund out of anger, that you shouldn't do that. It's an impulsive decision when you do it. You still consider that an impulsive decision?
Well, so my contention is you don't want to ever do do-overs in your life, because there's so many unintended consequences. If I'd have kept the fund open and still become the chairman of the board of the University of Rochester, I might not have done as good a job at the university. And the fund might have been very profitable. I might have made a lot more money, but my main job was to be the chairman of the board and to really make a difference at the university. And the president, president did a great job. He was the real driver, but helping him out, make that university better, raising more money than we raised in the history of the school, adding new programs, adding scholarships, adding $900 million worth of new buildings and so forth. So really, helping him make an inflection. If I'd have kept the fund open, I had obligations to my shareholders. I might not have done a good job we did a pretty good job at the university. I made 70 trips in 8 years, and I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was running the fund. So closing the fund was a good idea looking back. And, I think I made a decision. But even any decision I made, I don't want to do do-overs, because, they have unintended consequences, because you go through life and, you do what you have to do. people say, well, I wish I had done this and so forth. But if you'd done that, what else would have happened? I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm. Well, I have to ask you, I'm a data architect, so I'm very math oriented. So how do you switch your mind from being math oriented to business oriented? I find it difficult. I
From
would
what?
find it difficult.
Being what?
From math, from an engineer to a salesperson to
Well,
running a
that's what
business.
I recommend, if you can afford it and if you have the time, is to go to graduate school, any graduate school. Therefore, you get a chance to look at everything one more time. And the big secret is, I'm going to give you a big secret now. If you go to graduate school, you get 3 more summers before, during, and after, if you're clever. And you can test out other experiences, other businesses, other jobs, internships, and so forth. But so going to graduate school helps a lot. Otherwise, it is difficult to change. So I changed because I went to graduate school and I found it really finance. By the way, I almost went back into engineering. I offered my body to the company that I worked for prior to going to business school. But the job they offered me was not as exciting as being part of a financial institution. And I also found at the business school, I found a lot of things about myself. I really enjoyed working more with people than things. And engineers tend to work, a lot more by themselves and not with a whole body of people. I really enjoyed working with people, and I enjoyed watching people do better than they thought they could. That's what really excited me. And that told me that I should be a manager.
I really enjoy at page 54, you say, discover joy and passion that inspire you to get out of bed. That's very important. I find this just so correct. And you say, just try anything when you're at school, try all the new experience and everything. And that's a very good message for the young people.
Important. Early failure is a gift. I took Latin when I was in high school. I did a horrible job. I took advanced physics when I was at college. I almost flunked the course, but I tested all those parameters. And I said, that's not for me. And I know when I went to business school, I tested international business and turned out it wasn't. I really thought I really loved languages and I wanted to be an international businessman. But in 1964, it was too early. International business was not a good place to be at that point in time. Now it is. And in the 80s, 90s, it was. But it was too early. But I tested it. And I think I tell kids to test, just you think you want to. And by the way, the words that describe the jobs are so misleading. And in my book, you'll see I contrast the word investment banker with analyst and how, and I tell kids, forget what they call it. Ask them what you're going to do Monday morning, how much responsibility you're going to get, what you're physically going to do, how much freedom do you have, how much responsibility. Don't worry what they call you.
I know. I have to ask you, are you a fundamentalist or a technical analyst? I know that at financial world, you can be a fundamentalist.
I'm a fundamentalist. I understand the technical side. You have to. And I use it occasionally and so forth, but I'm a fundamentalist. I love calling on companies, talking to managements, asking them what their strategy is. That was my great secret. And I wasn't a good numbers man at all, surprisingly. I always asked the management what their strategy was. Then I took a picture of the world and see whether their strategy was correct. And my job, my main job was try to understand the world, understand their business. When they were going forward, were they going in the right direction? And if they're going in the right direction, you got half the problem solved. You see things that are happening in our society today, like Amazon, where they found something that everybody needed. And what I call latent demand. There's latent demand for things out there. If you can find it, boy, get the wind at your back and you're home free. I tell young people today to look at those things that are going to be needed. And if you like that thing, go into it.
Yeah, I know. I remember Amazon at the very beginning. I think the first 10, 15 years, they're not even making any money. They just keep on investing more.
Again, that's context. You see, if Amazon existed in the 50s or the 40s, they'd have gone bankrupt. But in today's world, people were willing to give them 10 or 15 years to develop their business. Back in the old days, they wouldn't do that. Amazon would have to make a profit. If it didn't make a profit, it wouldn't be in existence. So context is very, that's why you got to constantly say, that's why I, person like myself, can't quite understand all the things that are going on today, like crypto and cyber and so forth. Really, I'm studying it. I'm really working hard on crypto right now. But
Oh yeah, really.
and same thing with the cyber thing. I think it's very, very important, and it's something you have to understand. But each era has that. Each era has it, and that's why the turnover. It's time for some people to move on, and other people to take their place.
So what is your take on crypto? I heard a lot of different sentiment about crypto. You think crypto will stay or crypto will
It
be
looks
gone?
like it's here to stay. It has a use definitely outside the United States because as a currency, other countries can use it, and it has a place now. It's $3 trillion now, so it's
I know.
it's pretty much established.
Mhm,
I still don't understand it. I have not invested in it. I have a lot of friends that have invested in it. I have
mhm,
fund manager friends of mine that invested in it.
mhm,
I still don't quite understand, but that's not surprising because when I
mhm.
was a young man, the things that I did, a lot of the older people on Wall Street didn't understand what I was doing either. So I can't expect them to understand it. It's still confusing to me, I must admit. And I still don't feel there's any backing for it. It seems like some sort of, but most of the big banks are in it. Walmart has it in kiosks, and
Mhm.
but I think when things about crypto and all these new things, they last a while. Even though they last forever, they can have a pretty big, pretty big change,
Impact, right.
impact, and they can also have a period of difficulty too. Crypto
Mhm,
could fall. See, I don't know how much of crypto is on borrowed money. And if I could find that
mhm.
out, that if it's on a lot of borrowed money, then we may have a real problem. If it's not, then, but the whole concept of blockchain is a very, very important concept today. That's why I say young people today have so many advantages. I mean,
Mhm.
between crypto and artificial intelligence and virtual reality,
Exactly.
so many things they can go into, and they're happening. They're going to, but applies the whole medical field. I mean, we're
Mhm,
going to have to solve Alzheimer's. It's very
mhm.
important. And
I
there's a
know.
whole bunch of fields that, plus this whole technological change has social and political aspects to it. And we need people to take on those things as well. So I think that the world is really it's a big open opportunity experience for young people today. And that's why they got to get excited about it. They have to find their passion, what they want to do.
Yeah, I'm actually, my day job is a data architect, so I have to agree with all what you say. I mean, all the blockchain and everything, I understand. Well, in general, crypto is more or less like a project, and they run on venture capital, so they are running on some borrowed money. But how I think they're waiting for it to become actually live, then they starting to make money out of payment and everything as well. So that's pretty much the gist about crypto. So we got a question. Can you explain the difference between fundamentalist versus a technician?
Oh, fundamental is that you take the aspects of a company, its sales, its earnings, its balance sheet, its income statement, its product line, its customers and so forth. Technical is all a system of looking at what the stock has done. It's basically you take charts and shows as the stock has done, how much volume has occurred during certain points in the stock, where it is, and there are certain rules about technical. There's certain lines that people draw when they cross these lines, it becomes positive. When you cross the lines, certain times it becomes negative. So it's a charting system of the stock's performance. That's the technical aspect to it. And there are chartists that spend their entire life doing it, and they believe it. And then there are investors that use only charts as well, that are only technical analysts, and they love it. And then there's also some mechanical stuff today that basically systems, algorithms that basically take a stock's information, put it into a formula, and comes out with an answer what it expects the stock to do. There are whole companies like Renaissance built on these algorithms where they buy stocks basically only on information, never talk to the company, don't care what it does, not interested at all. They basically take the information on the stock, its volume, its movement, and so forth, who owns it, all kinds of other, how many times it's mentioned on television and so forth. They put that into a computer and they come out with an answer. And then they chart it on a graph, and it shows whether it's going up or down. And there's some of the technicians have done very well. There's a statement on Wall Street that there's no really wealthy technicians, but I'm not sure that's true. I think the
I don't
fundamentals
believe so.
still win, but the technical has an aspect to it. You have to learn. If any stock person has to learn the technical side, because there's so many people that are involved in technical, it influences you, so you can see it. But there is a big difference, and they're really two very different schools. But there are many more fundamentalists than there are technical analysts.
I think that's where adaptation coming from you, right? I mean, even at your age, you're still trying to adapt into the new crypto and
Right,
blockchain.
you
I'm
have to,
amazed.
you have to, because it changes, you can't, when they, they never thought they get rid of horses, they end up in automobiles, and now crypto is I mean, I feel very foolish, to tell you the truth, because I missed the whole thing. And, friends of mine have gone, they're making billionaires out of in the crypto industry right now. And, I should have known about that. I suspect if I was full-time working, I would probably be more knowledgeable about it. I would actually take it on. But I still study it. I've studied quite a bit, and I'm pretty comfortable. I think I understand it now, but I'm not ready to invest in it because I think it's gone too far already. Probably dead wrong.
I have to ask you this. I at one point at your book at page 177, you say at 1997 you see the market is very bullish, but you have a spidey tinkle that you know that there's something going on about the market. Do you see the same spidey tinkle that you have right now with our stock market right now at 2021?
Yes, but I've been wrong. I mean, I thought by this end of this year we were going to see. I mean, if you took the newspaper, today's newspaper, and you got it on January 1, 2021, you would have sold every stock in your portfolio. And yet we've had a one of the best years ever in the stock market. So I've been wrong about this. My stomach told me that this year, by the end of the year, early next year, we're going to have difficulty. You have rising rates, you have rising taxes, you have rising labor costs, you have difficulty with China, you have oil prices rising. I mean, almost you have a government which is basically having extreme difficulty. All those things in the old days would have caused huge declines in oil. China locking up the way it's locked up in the last few weeks, this would cause a huge decline in the stock market. The problem is we've printed so much money that it's sitting out there, and it basically has no place to go, because in the old days, and people don't realize this, the bond market is a lot bigger than the stock market, but nobody wants to go into bonds in Europe because they have negative interest rates. You put your money in bonds, you get less money back. In the United States, even a 10-year bond yields 1.5%, and you got to pay taxes on that 1.5%. So it really is no income at all. So it's what they call TINA. Basically, there is no alternative. There's no alternative but stocks. So stocks keep going up. But I must admit, I felt at the end of this year, given and I predicted a lot of the negatives. I said there's going to be rising labor costs. Inflation is starting to be difficult. Usually that causes a break in the market. It hasn't. And so I've sort of given up a couple weeks ago. I gave up. I'm back in buying situations that I think are attractive and so forth. Although I don't invest the way I used to. I mean, most of my money is run by other people, by young people. I have four funds that I own, and the average age of those funds is about 33. All young people, because they're there doing the work that I used to do. I trust them, and trust my family's money and so forth. And so, I feel that they know more than I do, and I think I recommend that to people. Don't cut your own hair. Don't clean your own teeth. Just get somebody who's a professional to handle your money.
Ed, I have so much fun to talk to you, but we are towards the end of the program, so this is like. I know we should talk a lot more, but my last question: what kind of message you want to tell this group as very last before we hand it over back to the library for closing?
Well, the message I want is that I'm hoping my book, and first of all, people that read it will relate to it, so they'll have some fun reading it. I just got a long email from a young man saying, even though his life was different than mine, there were a number of parts of my life that he related to or she related to. I think that's important. I want people to realize that, no matter what happens to you, you just try not to be a victim and try to move ahead into what's next. And there's so much what's next today. There's so many positives in the world today, even though we seem to have more difficult. You look back in history, and one nice thing about history, this is still one of the best periods of history ever. I mean, I know people are still poor, but the poor are very different than the poor were in around the turns of the century when people came to America and it was just awful and so forth. So I think my message is that anything is possible. It's a simple message that basically, and I think that everybody has an opportunity to go on. But my other message is about family. When it's all said and done, E.F. Hutton is gone, Lehman Brothers is gone, Herman Sales is gone. What you have left is what you've done for community, giving back, the University of Rochester, in my case, Brunswick School, Harvard Business School, and my family, my 3 children and my 8 grandchildren and my wife. So when you're all said and done, you get to be my age, you have basically family and friends. I'm involved in lots of other things, but come down to family and friends. And so the key to it is to spend time with those people. And then you look at, why do I put these vacations in my book? Because that really changes you. I argue strongly, never take more than a couple, 3 months without spending time with your wife. Once a year minimum, go away alone with your children. Your children, take each individual child. I took my daughter to Israel and Jordan. I took my oldest son to the Grand Canyon. I've taken my middle son every place. We've gone down the Green River together and so forth. And you take those periods of time. I don't care how hard you're working, if you have to just get in your car and drive a couple hours to someplace in the Adirondacks and be alone with your children and with your wife. And then that's when it's all said and done, that's what you got. That's really all that work and so forth. All those companies I worked at, all those wonderful things I did, they're books on the shelf today, and they don't mean a lot. But when your 8-year-old puts his arm around you, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And in my case now, when people say they read my book and it really helped them, it makes me feel pretty good.
Wow.
Who would never want to read a book that by someone where like James Dean? Okay. I would say, remember to read his book. It's very good.
I love her. Vivian, thank you so much. You were so good.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you both. On behalf of the library, I want to thank Tracy Goldblatt of Merrill Moss Media for telling us about Ed and Ed's book. If it weren't for her, we would not have thought to host you and invite you to come. And Miss Vivian, member of the Friends of the Gwinnett County Public Library, moderator of Atlanta Reads, we are so grateful for having you with us this evening. And of course, Ed, thank you for giving back this evening to Gwinnett County Public Library and all of the guests. Thank you very, very much. It was super inspirational.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Good night, everyone. Thank you.